All right, buddy. Inaugural episode. You ready to get this started?
Here we go. Meet the Nets. Meet the Nets. Come on out and greet the Nets. We got the...
Whoa, that's the wrong team. And I told you before, we have the theme music covered.
Oh, come on.
Welcome to We Got Nets, a podcast all about Brooklyn's finest basketball team. Here are your hosts, Adam Armbrecht and Doug Norrie.
Welcome to the We Got Nets podcast. I am Doug Norrie. Over there is Adam Armbrecht. This is the first full episode of our podcast where we're going to be covering the Brooklyn Nets. Real quick, buddy, I'm going to get into the little intro here. Scale of 1 to beyond excited, where do you kind of rank right now? Like, we need to hose you fully off about getting a full season of talking the Nets? Are you walking into this with careful trepidation about what it's going to become? Like, where you kind of land here on what's going to be? Won't be our best episode because it's the first, but it's going to be the historic one that people will point back to as the thing that started it all.
Every episode we do is going to be the best episode that we do. Yeah, I'm drenched over here in the excitement of it all. It's just, the Nets being relevant as you head into an offseason is great. The potential of landing some big names in free agency is amazing. And coming off of a solid year after a long wait, it's an exciting time to be a Nets fan, and it's an exciting time to be starting this podcast.
Look, you can read about us in the About section, so I'm not going to bore you with the lengthy and scintillating details but I'm Doug Norrie. I work for and own and operate Daily Fantasy Sports Rankings, DFSR. It's a player in the daily fantasy space, FanDuel and DraftKings, and I've been basically running or heading up our basketball projections and a lot of our content over the last few years for basketball. Over there is Adam. He's a lifelong Nets fan. He would give you the forever bio, so I'm just going to cut. He's a lifelong Nets fan, and we've been talking Nets pretty consistently for the last year, just offline. So we figured, why not just turn this into a Nets only podcast. You know what it was? It was you singing it was the Mets. It was the co-opting the Mets theme song in the openings. Now it's going to make
it's catchy.
It's going to make me switch my consonants maybe a couple times. But anyway, we're going to be with you all season, talking Nets, talking news, talking coverage. The offseason free agents, the draft, all that stuff. And then when we really get into the X's and O's of the games, which I'm excited about over the course of the season. We are coming off, we're recording this on the Friday after the finals just ended last night with the Raptors obviously taking down the Warriors. I don't even know, I was going to say maligned, but that's not true, the hobbled Warriors. Do you have any? We're going to talk about how this series really actually affects Brooklyn, and it's actually it's really interesting because not any other year would you say that I don't think Brooklyn had a direct line with some of these other teams on a cause effect of what could happen with their offseason compared to what happened during the finals. But thoughts on the finals here? We can spend a little bit of time on them talking about what it kind of. Were we taught anything as basketball fans here? Do we think it has long-lasting ramifications? Do you think that Toronto deserved to win? I guess is that deserved in quotes.
Yeah. Do we learn anything new? Injuries are bad, right. As far as Golden State goes, So, yeah, injuries always hurt your chances. I think over the course of the playoffs, we maybe saw and learned that Kawhi can has another level to him. I wasn't really anticipating him and the Raptors winning the finals as good as he is. I just didn't think necessarily the pieces around him were going to equal this. And, a combination of that with some just terrible injuries for Golden State gave him a chance. And listen, they got it done. So all the credit in the world to them. The role players played really well for them in that last game. I don't think it was the cleanest game by any stretch, but Here we are. They're the NBA Finals champions. So congratulations, Raptors.
I think that we're going to see – I think that this season is going to teach us – this season specifically with the finals and with these injuries is going to – I said long-lasting ramifications. I do think that these finals are going to sort of decide in a lot of ways how the next 5 or so years of the NBA play out. I don't think it's overstating it to say that. I think that the way between the injuries, the free agents, sort of the narratives, what happened with each team and how they approach the season, this is it completely alters the landscape of the NBA. And I think I'm going to get a little more specific as we kind of break down later about how this affects the Nets. Specifically, and because we're going to keep it Nets themed here, let's start with the injuries. Mm-hmm. Durant he ruptures the Achilles, obviously, so a devastating injury, basically the worst injury you can get as an NBA player, and it's still not totally clear about what the long-term effects of an Achilles injury are. It's mostly not worked out for players, so that's bad news. And then you get the Klay torn ACL. In terms of that, I mean, that's a little bit more manageable, and it's a little there's clearer timelines and clearer paths to recovery when it comes to the ACL. But I mean, I have some thoughts about how I think it affects the Nets in free agency specifically. I don't know, if you think, what you kind of thought was going to happen for them in terms of like who they might sign in the offseason, if you think that this ends up maybe altering their plan, or do you think they're going to kind of stick the course on what the plan was? I mean, we could say like right now, if you were the Nets right now, would you want to sign KD? I guess I can frame it like that. Would that be a place where you could go? Or I mean, we can kind of start there in terms of how these injuries affect Brooklyn and really just the NBA writ large.
Well, so I think, and I mean, the footnote was too, just when you see visually the KD injury, like it's so weird to see something physically happening, in real time where you actually see that injury. So I mean, and it's just brutal. And the little bit of extra info on that was just that I know like a lot of players that had a similar injury, it's anywhere from 250 to 375 days of recovery. Yep. So that gives you a gauge on where he's going to be. When it comes to the impact directly on the Nets, whether or not they had a chance, if they were going to be pursuing KD, I think when you're a team that had success the year before and was a playoff team, it's harder to maybe say you want to sign on for missing a guy for a year and then bring him into the fold to the following year, even as talented as KD is. I think the Nets are in a position right now where they want to be plugging in guys that come in this season and continue to build that confidence and build that success. And with 2 max spots available, let's say you could sign KD and let him sit for a year. Who's the other guy you bring in, and how do you sustain the health of the organization, in that sense? So I don't know about that. Overall, when you talk about the Klay injury, and we were talking about this off podcast, just what that means in terms of teams that are looking to go after free agents, if they're weary of going after a KD, if they're not going to look at a Klay. How does that affect maybe those, second-tier guys that the Nets maybe were kind of planning on having be their main targets? If they were going to, dive in on whoever, maybe say Julius Randle, just to give you a name. He's a top 20 free agent that's listed. If the Nets were going to go after him, all of a sudden with all these injuries, another team may throw more money at him. Another team may target him as, the player that they want. And suddenly the Nets are maybe on the outside looking in on a lot of guys, and they're forced into a decision about, do we roll the dice on players that are coming off some significant injuries, after these playoffs?
I don't know if I can sign on to do a podcast where I need to talk about Julius Randle for an entire season. So
it was the first thing that came to my mind. I probably could have gone a lot of different directions there.
We may have to do some kind of renegotiation about what it looks like. Like if the offseason looks like Julius Randle plus, I'm going to save a couple of these other names, but if it's a season of talking about Julius Randle as, not a max guy, but like something as like your biggest contract on the books, I might just jump ship and just say, I'll just talk about a different team, and we can just still talk about the Nets off. I'm just kidding. Julius Randle just feels like. But
let's say it was Kyrie. You know what I mean? Let's say
he's another one, man. I'll tell you, he's another one. I'm going to pause on the Kyrie thing for 1 second to go back to KD. I'm of 2 minds in this, and it's always hard to tell what an organization is hell-bent on doing, right? So the Nets clearly are hell-bent on signing guys. Now, to what end, right? Because they don't really have a core of players. They have LeVert, who's excellent. They now have Taurean Prince. We'll get into him a little bit later in the episode for the next season. They really don't have much else on the books besides Dinwiddie. And so, and guys on rookie contracts. Mm-hmm. So it becomes a question of, do you want, if you're looking to build to, you were in the first round this year and you want to get to the second round next year, if that's the realistic goal, then I think the path looks very different between that and say, we made the playoffs last year. We have some young guys, we have a lot of space, and in 2 years we want to make, 3 years we want to make a title run. I think the moves look very, very different. And the reason I say that is because, like specifically signing Durant, I personally, if I was a team, I would max Durant still because the risk is worth the reward. And I know that it might set me back and cost some people their jobs, and might set you back a decade in terms of being able to really be relevant. And guys like Durant simply just don't come around very often, or not often enough, that if you have a chance to get them, and I don't think the Nets are really great players in this space necessarily, but they could be, because this could really scare off other teams. So it's unclear to know where other teams are going to land on this injury. You don't get many chances to sign a guy like KD, and the chance that he could come back 100% in 2 years, to me, would be worth it on the risk. So that's like the one thing is like, do we want to be good 2 years from now or 3 years from now? Or do we want to just make the second round next year? And that's where a guy maybe like Kyrie comes in, because Kyrie can get you to the second round with him and another piece. And if that's your goal, then buoy for you. But that really can be your only goal. Him plus like Jimmy Butler or something like that. That's like second round material, and I'm not sure it's too much more. Am I way off base here? Because we kind of already disagreed about the Durant thing, which I like. I like disagreeing. I don't know where you kind of land on this.
Well, so I would say like with KD, like to me, I know it's been talked about a lot. Maybe the Knicks, right? And that makes a lot more sense to me, because the Knicks are a team that aren't looking going into next year and saying like, oh, we're just automatically going to turn. And even if you're targeting KD and he's healthy, that obviously changes your plan for next season. But a team that was bad this past year signs KD and says, okay, we're going to maybe bring in someone else as well, develop the players that we currently have, and then when KD comes back healthy, he plugs right in. To make a strong argument against signing KD regardless of the injury, it's a difficult thing to do. But when you talk about bringing in Kyrie and, like you said, maybe a Jimmy Butler and that advancing you to the second round, I'm not against it. My curiosity, and it's maybe what I'll put a question back to you, is if you bring in those guys to get to the second round, without either of them, and you say you brought back, and I know this is always, we're always going to touch back on this, of D'Angelo Russell on a max contract, but if you brought back D'Angelo Russell in the current roster, maybe you add someone, Julius Randle. It's just I'll keep it going the entire time. But and you bring in a different piece. You bring in another guy on a max contract that you have available. If you change the team maybe less in terms of some of these role players, and then next year you see that you still make the playoffs, and the goal is to get out of that first round, which I think they could accomplish still. I don't know what the give and take is of then in 2 or 3 years, the max contracts that you give to a Kyrie Irving, that you give to a Jimmy Butler, where do you end up? Because that means that you are playing the short game. And regardless of what my personal preference would be, I think organizationally, they've been building to be sustainable. They're not building for what I think the Knicks want to do. That fan base is so desperate that they're like, yeah, we'll sell the farm to get it one championship in the next 4 years, and it doesn't matter what happens after that. Where I think the Nets, especially in Brooklyn, you want to compete in that market, they want to be able to say over the next 10 years, we're a consistent team. And it's easy to draw those parallels from members of the organization coming from the Spurs and saying that's what they want. They want sustained success. So I think that impacts what their goals are for this free agency.
Oh man, I think the Knicks would kill a homeless guy if they knew they could get away with it just to make it out of the first round. I think that would be. Forget the championship. I think they would. Again, they'd have to know they could get away with it and kind of be able to wipe
all
off
the
their
legal
conscience.
back end of that. Sure.
Yeah, just like someone that nobody knew, some drifter that nobody knew about, something like that. I think they have dreams of grandeur, and I'm probably not totally the path. Although I guess they have some young players now. But yeah, no, I think this is the thing you'll never get from an organization. Maybe you give them truth serum or get them too many drinks into someone, but
direct honesty.
I will say though, their moves do point to a team that want to make a big splash, to unload the Crab contract specifically and bring in Prince for really he's making almost nothing, and to ditch the first round pick. Those are moves that just say we want to sign impact players. It's funny too. We're going to use during the course of this free agency, and probably beyond, we're going to use the term max player. Are we giving someone a max contract? It's almost a shame that they use these terms. This term is ubiquitous for all players, and it really has to do more with how the NBA salary structure is set up, because LeBron is a max player, and D'Angelo Russell, like you said, could be a max player, and no one would ever confuse these two guys, right? Except that the contracts can look very similar because of the way things are set up. But there's levels of these guys. And one of the worst things you can do as an organization sometimes is to pay max money to a guy that is just simply not a max player. And it's unfortunate because there's really just no way around it, right? You have to these guys just exist. There are only so many of them. They can't go to every team, and you have to spend the money. And when other guys are already under contract, where